Okay, hi. So this is a video analysis of Story of an Hour, which comes from the IGCSE English Anthology. So basically, it's a short story about a woman who is informed that her husband is dead and discovers that she feels more free and alive. However, upon her discovery that her husband is, in fact, alive, she dies of heart failure. A critique of one's spouse's control in marriage, no matter how well-meaning, or perhaps of marriage itself. The story uses literary techniques such as a variety of short and long sentences and irony. Okay, so I'll just run through the plot of the story in a bit more detail. So, the story is about a woman with a heart condition who is told that her husband has been killed in a train crash. She goes to her room and cries, but then comes to the realization that she feels more free, and that she can now live the many more years of her life for herself. She leaves the room triumphant, but her husband suddenly walks into the house, unaware that he has been reported dead. She dies of heart failure due to shock. Okay, so one of the things I noticed is that none of the language or sentences used in the story are by accident. For example, Josephine was kneeling before the closed door with her lips to the keyhole. End quotation. Why is she whispering? I mean, why is she kneeling before a closed door with her lips to the keyhole? Why isn't she just shouting through the door? Well, we've got to remember that Mrs. Mallard has a heart condition, which will be very important within the context of the story's ending. We also get a lot of language about nature, but I'll talk about this in the next slide in a sec. So we get some symbolic imagery throughout the story, usually related to nature, like the tops of trees that were all aquiver with new spring life. This is featured a few more times throughout the story, like her fancy was running a lot riot along those days ahead of her, spring days and summer days, and all sorts of days that would be her own. So we also know that Mrs. Mallard has heart trouble. This is not accidental. Perhaps it shows that her heart is not in the marriage. And when her husband is dead, her heart stops. This implies that society resists a woman's freedom, especially in the 19th century. Then we get that last sentence, the joy that kills. It's unlikely that the joy of seeing her husband is what kills her. So it's probably ironic or sarcastic. Or it shows that she prepared herself for the new freedom alone, which makes her happy, but then the sudden reversal proves to be fatal. Okay, so now I'll talk about the tone of the story. So the tone seems quite ironic. We see this from the very beginning when the author states that Richards had hastened to forestall any less careful, less tender friend in bearing the sad message, or her husband's death, but she dies later anyway. Or even when the author states that Mrs. Mallard was drinking in the very elixir of life, lines before then announcing her death. Okay, so now to talk about literary devices. So we see a variety of long and short sentences. So I've got an example here. I've highlighted the long sentence in yellow and the short sentence in green. So he stood amazed at Josephine's piercing cry, at Richard's quick motion to screen him from view of his wife. But Richard was too late. This is used to give us a sense of suspense. This next sentence also does this. Someone was opening the front door with a latchkey. Withholding of information makes reader think, this someone is only revealed to be Bentley Mallard in the next sentence. Again, this withholding is used in the sentence that I mentioned earlier, but Richard was too late. Too late for what? There's also foreshadowing irony, knowing that Mrs. Mallard was afflicted with a heart trouble. Great care, was taken to break to her as gently as possible the news of her husband's death. It's ironic, as she will die anyway. Also, that she is prepared for her husband's death, but not his life. Okay, so now let's talk about the message. It's probably a critique of a spouse's control in marriages, where men and women believe they have a right to impose a private will upon a fellow creature, end quote. This probably makes the story a critique of marriage in itself, as the Mallard's marriage is pretty much normal, where the wife knows that she will weep when she sees her husband's, begin quote, kind, tender hands folded in death, the face that had never looked save with love upon her, end quote. But she still feels trapped. Now let's talk about the point of view. The story is written from the perspective of an omniscient third person who manages to show the thoughts of Mrs. Mallard without making moral judgment, making sure we see her quite sympathetically. But ironically foreshadows future events. I explained that in tone as well. Okay, so now I'll talk about the structure. So it begins with a setting. It tells us about Mrs. Mallard's heart condition, sets the stage, Mrs. Mallard finds about her husband's death. Mrs. Mallard reacts unusually, not like many women have when they hear about their husband's deaths. This foreshadows her complicated feelings in the middle of the story. So let's talk about the middle now. So it shows how the wife begins to realise that she is free to live for only herself. And then we get the twist ending. The wife dies after seeing her husband alive as she leaves her room. So I'm sure you remember the heart condition. Now it's relevant. Again, this recalls how I said earlier that the author never says anything that is meaningless. Okay, so now for the end of the video. So in conclusion, Kate Chopin uses plenty of irony, foreshadowing and symbolism to paint a sympathetic view of Mrs. Mallard and to comment on marriage and control in the 19th century. So, thanks a lot for watching this video. Please leave a like if you enjoyed it. If you didn't, tell me why in the comments below. And it'd be great if you could subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. Bye.